Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and flat out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing ghost stories from Georgia. Let's get into it. Story 1. I was about 6 years old when this happened to me. Some things may seem confusing, such as why my parents won't believe me now when one of them was there, but there's a logical explanation that I know that I don't feel comfortable sharing. This is definitely not a dream I had, because I clearly remember waking up with a blue thing wrapped around me. Being young, I didn't and still don't have any idea what it was. Getting up and walking outside to where my grandpa was lighting a fire. I got 7 to 8 splinters in my feet because I didn't have shoes on. I had finished taking a shower and my mom entered the bathroom with a towel. For some reason, I didn't feel like getting out of the shower and just stood there looking at her in a daze. Normally, of course, I would simply get out, she would dry me off and help me dress. This time, however, I just stared at her. All of a sudden, it felt like someone pushed me and I fell forward towards the faucet, which I happened to hit at just the right angle to where it cut my side. I, at first, didn't feel any pain. In fact, I don't remember any pain or blood. I remember looking in the mirror, which was to my left, and seeing a cut in it. Being young, started crying. My mom asked me what was wrong, but I was hysterical and didn't respond. She turned me around and noticed the cut on my side. She proceeded to call my grandpa, who came over and carried me to their house that was 2 yards over. It was a small neighborhood with only our house next to the road, the yard, a tree house, an actual one with people living in it, and my grandparents' house. There was another set of houses across the street too, but those aren't important in the story. I don't remember what happened after that other than me waking up in bed. All I know is that I was pushed by something, and my mom and I were the only ones in the room. I've told my parents this story now, and they don't believe me. I won't elaborate on why they didn't believe me, but I will answer any other questions regarding this. Some details may be distorted or lost with time. I'm not sure about the history of the house. I don't live there anymore. Story 2. If you want to go to any place that is haunted, just go to the small city of Savannah, Georgia. It's teeming with haunted life. You can't escape it when you're there. Every square inch of that city is haunted. It makes sense since it's one of the oldest towns in the United States. The locals would knowingly live side by side with these spirits as if they're residents nonchalantly. I once saw an object move on its own next to a cashier, and he just casually moved it back and said, "Hey, Ghost of Kevin, stop moving my stuff already." The city even thrives off its paranormal attraction with bus and nightly tours. I went to college there as a hard skeptic, to come out as a total believer. Fun fact, my first dorm was formerly a coffin factory. That's how weirdly macabre this little city can be. I had many ghost stories from that city in my 4 years, but I'll tell one of them that still gives me the creeps to this day. One night in my dorm, I woke up around 2 a.m. and I needed to use the bathroom. As I went out across the hall to go, I saw someone out of the corner of my eye coming out of their room and started walking towards the other bathroom on that side. I didn't think much of it and thought it was my dorm mate who just happened to go at the same time. She tends to stay up really late to finish assignments anyhow. I did my business and started to walk back, only to see her walking back like me. I turned to look and wave at her, but stopped dead in my tracks, and so did this person. The girl wasn't my dorm mate. She had red hair, pale features, and she was wearing this large t-shirt that covers her down to her knees. What's extremely eerie was the fact that she stopped at the same time as me when I turned to look at her, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking right towards the room where my dorm mate would be. I started to wonder if the door leading to the bathroom had opened to begin with. I got tense and quickly went into my room to shut the door and lock it. It took me a moment and I decided it was just late night fogs and I imagined it, or it was a friend of hers, a peculiar friend she has. However, my door started to violently shake. Someone was trying to open the door in a hurry. I was startled and I called out to my dorm mate if that was her. No answer. I decided to open the door to see that no one was there. I felt freaked out, of course, but I just wanted to think it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Them playing a prank, or I was just fatigued. I eventually went back to sleep, but I was awoken again by something unknown. I felt something wasn't right. I was about to turn my lamp back on until I saw something out of the corner of my eye again, and it was in front of my door in my room. Obviously, I was scared now, and I thought it was a good idea to look right at where I supposedly saw someone, and I did. It was the same girl, staring at me, and she had these terrifyingly sad, pitch black eyes. I yelled in shock and switched on the lamp to find her gone right after. It wasn't long until my doormate in my hall came out and asked if I was okay. I was confident enough to tell her what I saw, but she didn't know what to think. I couldn't go back to sleep that night. Later, I decided to ask my doormate across the hall about what happened. When I described it to her, she immediately froze and she looked a little scared herself. She told me I saw her too. To be honest, I did some research on my own time about any significant hauntings in our dorms. I found a case where a female student committed suicide in my room where I stay in. Sadly, there are cases of students committing suicide notoriously, so every year attending this college. To this day, it makes the hairs from the back of my head stand up just thinking about it, but I do hope that this spirit finds peace. Story 3. Things move around sometimes in a home that has people in it who are experiencing an emotional upheaval. People say that poltergeist activities are usually centered around adolescence. I am turning 39 this year, but that is besides the point. I have an active imagination, and I'm always at the center of some creative whirlwind wherever I go. I was also divorced last year after 10 fruitless years of marriage. Last year was not my best time. I had to move back in with my mom and stepfather. At the time of these goings on, they lived in Hahira, Georgia. I was upset, but I know that I tried very hard to have a good attitude about having to start my life over again for the 5th time. It wasn't just me that brought the attitude to the house in Hahira. There was a good amount of it there already. During the time we lived there, every single one of us heard footsteps walking around and a child talking outside the house. My stepfather, Mark, was the first person to hear the child. Mark smoked cigarettes like nobody's business, back and forth on the porch out back, all hours of the day and night. He has a herniated disc in his back, which facilitates the behavior of being awake all night and all day. He reported hearing a child who seemed to be trying to get his attention shortly after midnight. It said, "Mark, Mark, Mark," in an excited whisper. He said that the sound was close by his face, but the floodlights illuminated everything nearby, and there was nothing to be seen at the time. The porch he was sitting on was a concrete square that was attached to the ground. There was no one there but himself. He started smoking on the front porch after that. To be honest, when he said that, I thought, obviously he needs a good night's sleep. I thought this despite the fact that I was hearing footsteps all the time, and my personal items were being moved all over the house. 2 times I had the unique experience of finding all my socks separated from each other in my drawer. I can be scatterbrained, but there's no way that I am the cause of that one. I changed my mind about the child one day when I met a little boy named Colin, who was coasting around aimlessly in our backyard. I got his attention and asked him if he was looking for anything. He said he was looking for a child that lived in my house. I told Colin that no children live in my house or ever have. It was a new house and my parents were the first people to live there. Colin looked confused. He asked if Mark lived there. I said, "Sure, Mark lives here, but he's 67. Who are you looking for?" Colin, still confused, did not answer me and ran off. He came back after about 2 hours and insisted that there was a little boy that lived in my house, and this boy told Colin to come back later to play. He was certain that a child about his own age of 7 or 8 was there, living in my house. He said he saw him that day. Well, this mysterious child in my house was the subject of much speculation, but of course we never got any answers about that. Colin, I found out, lived nearby, but Mark said he had never seen Colin before. It was very startling that Colin asked for Mark. At that time, I thought there was a connection between Colin and whatever was pestering Mark outside while he was smoking. I feel silly about this, but after first meeting Colin, I began to entertain the idea that a ghost child had told Colin about the people he lives with. In reality, it was probably only like this. Colin knew who Mark was, and since I was a dead end for his questioning, he wanted to ask Mark about the boy who lives with us. And poor little Colin never did stop asking about him, as long as we lived there. I asked Colin what the boy's name was, but he said, "I don't know, I didn't ask." I may have even had an interaction with this child. The same day that Colin first came looking for him, I was in the backyard. The backyard of this house is huge and open. I was standing somewhere near the middle when a small chunk of concrete came sailing out of empty space and hit me in the collarbone. With my eyes looking along the lines of the possible trajectory, I stooped down and picked up the concrete. I stayed in the yard for half an hour, a half hour that was filled with speculative minutes. No one ever became visible. It didn't matter. There wasn't any way for anyone to be able to hit me with such speed and accuracy from cover of the woods, 400 yards away. Eventually, I stopped wondering about the concrete. Not long after that, something else happened inside the house that seemed like it was beyond what I consider to be poltergeist activity. One day, while my stepfather was at an appointment with his VA doctor, I had what seemed to be to me a negative interaction with something. I was sitting in my room reading my email, and I heard footsteps pass in the hall behind me. They went in my mother's room, and I heard the light switch go off. I got up and walked into her bedroom, opened the door. There were no lights on, but everything was clearly visible since, as far as I can remember, it was around noon. I saw no one in there, but I knew someone went that way and didn't come out. Her closet door was shut, and I could see that the light was on. I went to the door and asked, "Mom, are you in the closet?" "No," said someone who was most definitely in there. It sounded like her. I thought to myself, what the fresh hell is this? I'm used to my mother's attitude, but this was a new development. I backed out of her room slowly, down the hall and into the kitchen, where I was able to see out the window from which you can view a considerable portion of the backyard. She was far out in the backyard pulling up weeds. She was not in the closet. I asked her when she came in if she had somehow heard me ask that question. She didn't know what I was talking about. I think that was the turning point for me. I decided to stop being a bemused bystander in my own house. There have been many times that I have recommended that people give rocks cleansing a try. That is because I used this method over the course of 3 days while my parents were out of town. Never heard a peep after that day. Story 4. This is the first time I'm sharing one of my stories. It's 3:30 in the morning. About an hour ago I woke up from a dream. My grandfather was in it. I walked into a church and saw him talking with a group of people near the altar, so I approached him and he was happy to see me. After he hugged me, he suddenly got tired and older looking, and even liver spots started showing up and his skin turned gray. I helped him to sit down, then I woke up. It bothered me and I couldn't sleep, so I went outside to look at the stars. Lately you've been able to see Jupiter and Saturn, but by this hour they were already gone. While I was looking up, I clearly heard footsteps walking a circle around me in the grass. Then they stopped on the pavement, and I saw a shape of a person out of the corner of my eye. I turned and nothing was there to be seen, but they were still walking a circle that seemed to be 5 feet away from me. When the steps came down on the pavement, they made a clicking noise in the way that dress shoes or steel-toed boots do. I heard the train in the distance, and then I quickly walked back inside and locked the door. My maternal grandfather had been dead for 7 years, and we were never close. He and my grandmother were divorced in the late 60s, and I was much closer to her second husband, who I considered to be my grandpa. I can't imagine that he would be whatever is behind the footsteps. We didn't even know each other. Besides, I had the feeling that it was something else. I had been awake for over an hour before I decided to go outside, so I am reasonably certain that it wasn't imaginary. I live in the county in South Georgia, near Valdosta. There was enough light from the porch, so I know it wasn't a deer. It may not be interesting, and there isn't much on the supernatural side of it, but I think I'm done looking at the stars for the time being. Story 5. My brother died in a tragic accident several years ago. A few months after he died, my mother and I were sitting in her living room reminiscing about him when she suddenly asked me if my son, who was 10 years old at the time, would like to have my brother's black fedora hat. My brother liked hats, specifically the fedora, because when he was a teen he loved John Belushi and the Blues Brothers skits on SNL, thus developing an affinity for the black fedora. I was a bit surprised that she offered because I had not mentioned to my mother that my son had recently asked to get a black fedora. It was an odd request from him because my son is pretty quiet, low-key, and decidedly not one to wear a fedora. He and my brother were not close because we didn't see each other all that often, mostly just on holidays or birthdays. However, I'm certain my brother did love him. Furthermore, I had never discussed my brother's black hat with my son, and I don't recall seeing my brother ever wear it, although my son may have seen him in it in a photo somewhere at my mother's house. So when my son asked for one, I just thought it was one of those phases kids go through with hats. My mom gave the hat to my son that day, and we left her house. It was a short drive home, during which my son was grinning from ear to ear while wearing the fedora. My brother was very heavy on my mind during that drive home, and I felt a deep sadness. The news was on the radio, and it was mostly bad, so I changed the station in search of something to lighten the mood. The first station I switched to was playing Soul Man. It was my brother's favorite cover song that Belushi and Aykroyd sang in the skit. I found a lot of comfort in that. It was such a coincidence that the song came on. I had never heard it on the radio before, and I don't think I have ever since. Was it my brother giving his okay for my son to have something of his that was significant, or was it a mere coincidence? Who knows for sure, but I felt comforted and a sense of wonder. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.